Welcome back, everyone. I'm sure you had some amazing stories over there, and I'm inviting us all to share in chat. There's a prompt that you can see there. Tell us what is the magic of listening to someone else's story. In a few words, I'll give us a second. What are some of the things that have come up for you as you are listening to others share their honest stories? What are the keywords that you'd like to highlight for us? Relatability. That's a nice one. Being open to the unexpected. Thank you, Christina. You felt connected. We were hoping you would. Connection. Connection. Um, Humanity, empathy, connection, bravery. Definitely, Flo. You do need to be brave that to tell strangers some of these are really, and vulnerability goes hand in hand. A connection again, empathy. Yeah, it seems that you guys really got to dig into, your inner selves. That's really wonderful. A quick window into what motivates someone else. That's really wonderful. Thank you so much. Please bring those responses. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. What stood out for you? How is listening important? And this actually creates an important ingredient for our session today. But before I get into that, thank you guys. Keep them coming, keep them coming. We will get to read them one by one. Take your time to go through the chat as well. I'm gonna invite us to go into a quick Mentimeter questionnaire, and this is something that our co-designers today have beautifully curated for us, and it will form the basis of our discussion today. So there is a link you will see there in chat, Brandon. I hope you were able to share the link there. Please click on the link, and it will take us to 4 quick questions, and we just want you to give us your thoughts. In case you're not able to open this link, feel free to input your responses in chat as well. That is fine. I know some of us have technical issues. Here is the first one. What is the role of hope in narrative work? What are the thoughts that come to your mind as you think of that? There are no wrong or right answers over here. So just share what you felt seeing working in your own networks and organizations. What is the role of hope in narrative work? It helps us to stay focused. It's contagious. It really is to inspire. Keep them coming, guys. Keep them coming. To see and want a better future. It keeps us interested. It motivates action. Such a warm feeling that hope is, and definitely the responses do reflect that. And as we continue, we'll go to the next slide, and the next question is, what are the stages of weaving and communicating a story? As I've said, there are no wrong or right answers here. Just take 1 quick minute to think about this one. In your own views, what do you think are the stages of weaving and communicating a story? Quick ones. You don't have to deep dive into it. You can just share some of the keywords that come to your mind. Connecting to emotion, person to collective to action, listening first. I'm loving the responses, cohesion, connection coming out strongly. Once again, brainstorming together, painting a picture of the context, describe the actors and the themes we are working on. I love that response, relationship building. Keep them coming, guys. Seek first and understand. I love that we're all laying the foundation by listening first. A light bulb moment. Nice one. The next question, what is imagination? How would you best describe imagination? What are the words that come to you? What are the first thoughts that came to you when you saw this word imagination? Dreaming, creativity, internal creativity. If you can't log into Mentimeter, please share it in chat as well. Magic, stories of the mind, sparks curiosity, thinking outside the box, lovely answers. Thanks, guys. And finally, our last slide. What role does listening play in storytelling? Back to that listening once again. What role does it play? Everything. What a nice way to frame it. It's the heart of the story, a crucial role. Clearly, we all understand the fundamental importance of listening, embracing balcony, embracing balcony, fosters connection, making clear what elements are perceptible to everyone, understand where to connect from. Without listening, there is no story where it starts and ends. Ah, Thank you guys for participating in that. And it's so wonderful to see that we all understand some of the fundamentals of creating a story. And I'm going to invite Jessica to actually kick us off a reflective period here where the speakers get to share some of the frameworks and some of their thoughts on what makes a proper storytelling process. So, Jessica, you've seen some of the ideas that have come through in regards to the importance of listening, and all the keywords there, they have the basic entity in them, in that nothing can happen without listening, being laid as a proper foundation. So, tell us your thoughts around that.
Um, Thank you so much, Beverly. Yes, listening to me is also a crucial aspect of the process of telling an ethical, genuine story. And I do want to share, I think, a practice that really hits home for me on, a starting place in terms of how do I really channel listening when I'm telling stories. And before I do that, I feel like I do want to share the definition of storytelling that really grounds my practice, just in the hope that that might also help us kind of shape the conversation. And I'm curious what the other contributors think in response to the definition too. But and story listening really plays a role in this. So this definition is from Resource Media, and they say that ethical storytelling is really an ongoing collaborative process, right? So that listening piece comes in here because there's a storyteller and a story listener. And it's a process that really that values relationship building, and it moves at the speed of trust, right? We've all heard that before. So it can be a slow process because we need to really value relationship building through the storytelling and the story listening. And then importantly, it defers the knowledge to the storyteller, right? Incorporating their expertise from the very beginning of a storytelling process. So that's the practice that I'd love to share with you. And I think builds on this really critical aspect of listening, which is to acknowledge each storyteller as the expert of their own story, right? So it's an orientation or a mindset that we can adopt when we are in the practice of perhaps telling a story or creating the conditions for others to share their stories with us. And let's say we're in the process of creating a story, which is often the role that I'm in. This practice looks like bringing the participants into the process of crafting the narrative from the very beginning, right? So we can come in with questions when we are trying to evoke stories from people, but we really need to treat the process as a collaborative one from my perspective, and really come with that listening orientation so that we can treat the participant or the person who's sharing their story as the expert. So really deferring to their own knowledge. So I have more to share, but I want to hear what this brings up for my other my fellow contributors.
I love what Jessica said, and here I wanted to add even another lens to what she said about having a participatory situation where where you're collaborative and there are participants and you hear their stories, and also being mindful of everyone's location, sociocultural, religious, political location, because our positionality as all of us who are in organizations or individuals who are weaving stories our positionality of being able to weave the story. Who are we? Whose story are we telling? Is it our own story? Is it someone else's story? How is our power dynamic in comparison to someone else's? If I am in a relatively more privileged position, and the story that I'm writing to, let's say, to a funder or to other organizations, is just to show to the outside world, if the story is about a community which is oppressed or less privileged in my comparison, how am I allowed to approach it? In terms of ethics, how am I supposed to approach that story? Firstly, can I even tell that story? If in a professional capacity, I can. What do I need to keep in mind? The wording I'm using, the language. How am I approaching the story? How am I being mindful of myself? And also the power that comes with it, because stories are power. You get to access the world, especially if you're disseminating a story. You're accessing this entire world. We, as the four people on the screen right now, we have a lot of power right now because we are saying something, and it's a one-sided conversation for the next 10 minutes. So how are we as story weavers and storytellers using this power? How are we sharing this power? Jessica already said it. Others' words. So yeah, how are we doing it? And yeah, there are some ideas of how we can do it that might come later on, but would love to hear others at this point.
I can say that what I like very much about what Jessica said is that this idea that when you tell a story, you're collectively building on shared values. And I think that's why listening as the first step is so important, because when you listen is when you identify what is the value that I share with this person. And then that's where you ground your story and you can start building from there. I have to say that in my work, I don't use the word storytelling as much as narrative work. I have the feeling, and I might be wrong by listening to you, but to me, storytelling can be a more individual exercise. I guess I'm learning today that it's not. But definitely narrative work is about collectively telling stories that have some shared values and a shared worldview, so we can dispute what we have perceived as common sense, the hegemonic narratives that have made us believe what is possible and what is not, what is acceptable and what is not, which stories are worth listening to, and who gets to tell the story and who doesn't. So as a tool for social change, the use of storytelling with this idea of connecting values, I think it's crucial, and this also help us achieve something that's very difficult, which is creating common ground across movements that have very different agendas, but that ultimately share those values.
I'll add just around the idea of ethical storytelling and listening. I think, Jessica, you probably started out there on the aspect of listening, and the number of times when, very small example, I'm asked for something like a bio, and I write it and I send it to whomever needs it, and then it comes back and it's not what I wrote, and I feel it's not representative of me. And that is a lens that always helps me to remember that when I'm crafting something that's about or on behalf of others, am I honoring what they actually meant? And something that comes back to me from the days of my master's was reading a book of interviews with a series of women from Zimbabwe who had participated in the liberation struggle in the 1970s and 80s. And reading each of the interviews, and they seemed so formatted. And I remember then reading a critique of that book of interviews. And the critique was, the interviewer seems to have gone in with, or the questioner seems to have gone in with an underlying message of, tell us what we want to hear. And that for me is very, very important in framing what and Monica, you just mentioned common ground. how we relate. And Kavi, you mentioned power dynamics, how we relate in spaces where we're trying to bring together different elements of people's lives and their experiences, their aspirations, hopes, difficulties into a story that we are or others with us are going to deliver elsewhere on their behalf. And just really being mindful of what is the subtext of how we're relating, and are we saying to people, we want to know this, so tell us what we want to hear. Part of the efforts and part of the listening.
Oh, I feel really moved by what you just shared. I mean, I think that's so critical. And the lens that's coming up for me just to reflect back to you is like coming in with a beginner's mindset, just really checking your assumptions at the door and trying to leave your biases as someone who might be collecting stories is just so critical. And it gets back to what you said, Kavya, too, about the power of the narrator, right? Like we have so much power. And it's so critical to like bring that awareness in when we're coming in to collect stories. Yeah, there's so much to say about where that power can show up. But I just wanted to like plus one early on your comment about the mindset piece. And it also brings up for me the need, or maybe actually to connect the two comments, right? Power shows up also in consent. And I think that's a really interesting aspect of ethical storytelling as well. It's like when we go connect with communities together, their stories, have we asked them for consent to share their story? And are we asking them continuously throughout the process of perhaps harvesting the story and writing the story? Do they consent to the vision of how the story is going to be used? Do they consent to, what you've harvested and reflected back in the story? It's so critical to just, another practice that's coming up for me is just that constant, checking in out of shared values, out of trust, out of respect, out of a desire to really amplify someone's voice with dignity, right? We want to make sure that we're staying in alignment with how they see their experience, and consent and creating an opportunity for them to consent to the process that you're involved in and where you're going to share the stories.
I think another thing, adding on to what you just said, it's also important to be mindful of how these stories can be used, because once you put these stories out into the world, everyone is taking them in however they want. Or I mean, also said this, how with the bio, someone takes it and then uses it in another way, presents it in another way. So how are we taking someone's information, then molding it into a story and then putting it out there? So being mindful of what information are we even letting out there? Is it some information that the world necessarily doesn't need to know, like some safe practice of a community which uses it to protect themselves, a safe inner circle? So if I'm a researcher, do I even have to put this information out there? Can I just let it be? So what do we choose to include in our stories and what do we not? And another side of this, which as a practice, I'm trying to do more, is looking at politics of citation. Who do we choose to cite, not just in our research, but in our story? So if a project lead is submitting a story as a proposal or a report to a funder, a magazine, and website, blog, are they attributing due acknowledgement and credit to the person whose story it is, the person who passed on the story to them, the person who clicked the photos in the field, in the community which go along with the story, the project associate who drafted the story? Are we giving due credit where it's where it's due? So I think those are important practices for ethics as well.
Can I go back to the idea of narrative power that you brought up earlier? Last year, we had an event and we actually called it "We Have the Narrative Power." And I think it's very important for people to understand that each of us has the power of using the stories that we can create or imagine, but also the ones that we repeat. And that includes what's the series you're watching, what's the book you're reading, what's the theater play that you went to see, but also how do you speak about what's the gossip that's running around in your family or with your friends, and being more conscious about how whether you're reinforcing hegemonic narratives or how you do have the power to tell a new and different story, to change the story. And a lot of what we do at Puentes we have a training platform where we offer tools for mostly activist organizations, collectives, to come and strengthen their narrative muscle. So they can tell their own stories. And then we also have some strategic platforms where we try to reclaim certain narratives that have been instrumentalized to advance very conservative agendas. So, for example, we are reclaiming the narrative around families. We all have families, and they all look very different, and we probably have had the intention of creating a certain type of family. But apparently the ones that only get to talk about family in a very monolithic way with, a provider as a father, a caretaker as a mother, obedient children, full stop, is the only one that is perceived as legitimate. So how can we build a community that can start telling another types of stories around families so we can reclaim that narrative and say, like, okay, there are many different ways that we can understand families, and that really gives us all a sense of power, because when we do it at this collective and with the aim of gaining scale, enough scale to dispute what has become common sense, it's really empowering. Just so you know, our other platforms, one is reclaiming faith in a way that is harmonic with human rights and gender justice. And we're now doing a pilot around security. How do we talk about security in a way that is compatible with our values?
I absolutely love that, Monica, and the fact that the word reclaiming and asking that question, according to whom. So I'll just give a story here. When I was 8 years old, I moved from where I was born in the Caribbean, halfway across the world, to grow up in Zimbabwe. And when I got to Zimbabwe, I discovered that I was poor. I didn't know that when I was a small child. I used to run down the river with my bare feet and catch whatever it was in the river for us to eat. And that was everybody. And we didn't have unit families. And I moved into a more structured kind of schooling system and all of that. And I learned that everything that I had grown up in was poverty. Poverty according to whom? And so when we are in that process of collectively telling stories of movements, of communities, and all of those kinds of things, exactly what you just said, reclaiming narratives, what we mean by poverty or what we don't mean by poverty, what this particular community means by family, what doesn't mean by family. My definition of family is entirely different from very many of the definitions of family, right? I consider that trees in my family, but just being upfront about that part of things. But yes, always privilege according to whom, power according to whom. The word empowerment, for example, always I struggle with the word empowerment. What does it mean? Who is giving power to whom? And all of those things. And I think spending some time questioning each of the terms is actually an ethical practice, and questioning those terms alongside those who are the center of the story that we're wanting to tell is really, really very important. That we're not reproducing some of the power dynamics that we are trying to break.
Thank you for sharing, Ermin. It's a really powerful example. And I wonder if it might be, I'm just actually quite curious to talk a little bit about, because we're naming we're naming story, and we're also naming narrative. And I feel like it might be really interesting among us just to talk about, well, what are each of those two different concepts like mean to us, so that we can create some shared understanding, because it's amazing right now how much attention storytelling and story and narrative it has kind of in the field. And I think it's helpful to clarify. And for me, and so I'm curious what you all think in response, but for me, a story is an individual, it kind of, I don't know if I want to use the word unit, but it's an individual piece, right? With a beginning, middle, and end. It has the power to really inspire. An example is the story that you just shared, Ermine, of your life and your childhood, right? So this is a story that belongs to you. It's individual. It touched us emotionally, right? And so that's one piece. And then in my mind, a narrative is like a constellation of stories. So it's how do these individual stories add up over space and time to kind of create this like fabric of meaning, right, at a higher level. So it influences culture. And that's what, to me, when I use the word narrative, or when I hear you all using the word narrative, that's what I think about the difference between the two. Does that land with you, or how do you see the difference and the similarity? Yeah, I mean, what do you think?
Interesting. That really interesting, because I come at it the other way. For me, narrative is that underlying thing that I'm trying to say, or wanting to convey, and the story is the container in which that's delivered. So I just told a story of when I was a little girl, I didn't know I was poor until I moved over here and learned English and the dictionary, and learned that I was poor. That's the story. That's a container for the message. For me, the message is the narrative. The narrative being, I guess, according to whom? Well, how did you start this thread, Monica? I can't remember exactly the terminology, but reclaiming the narrative. And I guess the narrative there is a word, well, poverty means this over there and it means that over there. And just because we think people are poor doesn't necessarily mean that they believe they're poor, in which case they're probably not poor. So that for me is the narrative that can apply to so many different stories. And the story I just told is just one container in which to deliver that same message.
I think this is interesting because I do realize that narrative, these words are used in so many different ways. And I guess I would agree with both of you in terms of understanding that narrative can be understood as that key message that you want to communicate through the story, but also the collection of stories that have that shared message is what makes it a narrative in the sense of meaning-making system. And that's when we say that it ends up naturalizing a certain way of understanding the world. Only when narratives gain enough scale is when people start to naturalize a certain values and worldviews, and then it becomes very difficult to fight those. And I think we usually use one example that I think is very telling. It was developed in the US by Reframe. So if I ask you, between the shark and the dog, which animal do people think is more dangerous? Do you want to answer in the chat, anyone? Dog is more dangerous. You're spoiling my example. Human for sure, but the question is between the dog and the shark. So if we ask people on the street, they'll probably say the shark, even though data shows that sharks only account for 10 deaths a year, while dogs account for 25,000, if I'm correct, deaths a year. And then, first of all, try to imagine how many times you've encountered people that are frustrated because data isn't enough for people to get to understand at a certain point. And this is a very good example, because when you go back and analyze what are the stories that we have been told about sharks and dogs, then completely understand. Sharks are only always these violent, insatiable animals that are almost like a symbol of fear. And then dogs are loving and loyal and even part of the family. And that's when you start understanding the power of narratives in the way that we understand the world. And at the same time, you can start asking yourself, well, what are the stories that we have traditionally heard about women, indigenous people, migrants, Black people, trans people? And then you understand what we are up against. And also, why is it so important that those of us that are wanting to change the world, that want to change history with capital H, need to start changing stories. I cannot do the game of words that I can do in Spanish, because in Spanish it's the same word. So history with capital H, and the stories, I would say in Spanish, with a lowercase h.
I love that example, and someone said on the chat that it depends on the perspective. And I would agree, because when you posed the question, that was the first thing I thought of, that from what perspective are we on the land, or are we on ground? And I just wanted to add to the entire discussion, and I do think that it's very productive to see, to get everyone on the same page, but also wondering if sometimes we get, flown away in these discussions of nomenclature and what do we call what, because at the end of the day, everyone is sort of saying the same thing of how we must be reflexive and be contextual, like whose story, what story, how do we feel in what location. So yeah, I think we're going towards the end of this segment, but just wanted to end with how reflexivity is then important in our storytelling, and bringing together that with perspective and how one can use certain narratives is important. Beverly, over to you.
I didn't want this discussion to end. I was just so engrossed in it. Thank you so much, Kavya. And I think you have brought out so many different frameworks in a way that we can all identify in the work that we do. And I really appreciate how you've done it in a way that you've masterfully woven it into the discussion. And I just want us to take a little bit of time to really reflect on what Jessica and Kavya and Arlene and Monica have shared, by putting into chat other frameworks that we use or we've come across in our networks, in our organization. We'll take just a few minutes and Brennan is going to play us some music, and we are going to incorporate everything that we have had our four lovely speakers telling us about, but most importantly, things that have not been shared here as well. So we are all going to craft a framework together, and we'll only do this in 5 minutes. So go ahead. The prompt will be there in chat. We will be sharing links. We'll be sharing our own thoughts and our own ideas on frameworks that we have come across or that we use in our work, in our day-to-day. And we are being entertained by some wonderful festival playlists that you can also get to see the link of in case you're interested in. But here is the prompt for us. Brandon, if you can just put it there. Take some time. We've had so much from the speakers. Let's introduce other frameworks that have not been mentioned here. If you have something close to that, that's not necessarily a framework, but you feel is closely linked to that, please feel free to share it as well. And I hope that we are all taking note of these wonderful resources that are coming in. Thanks, guys, for all that. We'll be compiling them shortly. Brennan will be doing that and sharing them with us. And as he's doing that, we are gonna go into our creative session together. We've learned so much together, from the Mentimeter to the open dialogue session we've had, and we actually want to see how we weave all these beautiful things together into our story. And I'll invite Armin to introduce the next interactive activity that we have all been looking forward to sharing, and I believe it's something that would excite everyone. So Armin, go ahead and let us know the agenda for the next few minutes.
Thanks, Beverly. Let me just jump into my notes so that I stay on track. I tend to go off track quite a lot because that's part of how I tell stories. So this next activity, a little while ago, well, all of us have been talking about collaborative. Hold on, let me just actually find the notes first. Give me 1 second. There we are. We've been talking about collaborative storytelling, and so we're going to craft a story together. What we're going to do is we're going to invite you into breakout rooms in groups of 5, and we're going to give you a story prompt. You have 15 minutes to craft a story together. Sorry. Let me just go back and look. It's a good idea to assign someone as a scribe or take turns scribing in one document so your story is down. There is a document that Brenda has already created for you to drop your story into as a group. You start by, there's an unfinished sentence in the prompt, so you start by completing that, and then everyone adds a sentence. Before we get there, however, no, I'll come back to that. It can be anything you want in any order at all. Every contribution is a good contribution. There's no such thing as a wrong or a bad contribution. There's no such thing as I don't have anything to add. Everybody has something to add. Somewhere between stepping out of your comfort zone and going with the flow. But we jump in and collectively tell that story. And before we go there, I'd just like to take one moment to ask, and this question came up in the Mentimeter, what is imagination? And very many answers came up. And that's always very interesting, Mentimeter answers, because we realize the extent to which one thing is made up of so many different things. So imagination is not just one thing. In the same way that love is not just one thing, it's made up of so very many components. And one of the components for me that's really important in imagination is questions. Like, why do we tell it this way? How about if we were to do that? What if we thought like this? What if we did it like that? What if we didn't do it like that? How come? Why not? Why? Who? What? All of those kinds of questions are so important in story crafting. It's so important in building imagination and making us think further than what we're able to immediately see. So have fun with that. Maybe we can have a story crafted out of questions, or however you want to do it. Enjoy, bring your imaginative self, bring your fun self, have loads of fun, and we are looking forward to those stories in the next 15 minutes. The prompt, Beverly, will you drop the prompt in the, or is it already in the story document?
In the story,
It's already in the story document.
I'll show everybody this, and then I'll open breakouts in it right after this. So you should have the document is shared in chat. See, a lot of you are already on it. First, at the top of the document is a bunch of, so Monica asked for the responses from the Mentimeter. So we actually pulled together, as we were listening, the responses from all the questions, the responses from your questions in chat, a summary of what the panelists said. And we actually asked AI to give us a summary of all of that to propose a framework. And we'll drop in a moment your resources that you shared. But what you want to do is to jump down to our collective stories. The instructions that Irman just gave are right there. And we're going to open the groups, and each of you will have one of, in your groups, one of the hosts today to also help guide you through this experience.
And welcome back, everyone. I hope you guys had as much fun as we did in our rooms, in our room 6. The chats will be there for everyone to go through the story. So take your time whenever you want. If you do want to have a good laugh or to just marvel at people's creativities, it's there for you to have a look at. With only 6 minutes left, I'm gonna invite our speakers to take on a few questions that have come up. There were some in chat that I saw. So this is a wonderful moment for us to really ask them to clarify on anything or to just add on to anything that has already been shared. So go ahead and raise your hand if you have a question, and you can just point out to any of our four amazing speakers, and they will take it on. There was one that was asking about translation getting lost where language is involved to somewhere there. I think it was, if I'm not wrong, it was Theodora. I am curious, what do you feel about language? How much of the story gets lost in translation? Just gonna go ahead and ask Kavya to respond to that one.
I think responded it really well, but I think it's the acknowledgement that it does get lost in translation, and then moving on and finding solutions from there. How can we come to the closest? How can we get it checked from someone else? But also visual storytelling and using, I also like just putting in the original there as well, so that people, if you have a translated piece, bite, also putting in the original, so that like people can also look it up themselves, and if they need their own interpretation of it, so that you're not just showcasing your own thing. Especially as earlier as well, Monica said this one thing about that, this wordplay in English and in Spanish. Like, just give both. Give more to everyone rather than giving less. That would be my thing. But yeah, what do others think?
Thanks, Kavya. Armin, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Kavya. And I'm thinking, I always like to bring examples and anecdotes. I'm thinking of an exhibition I went to a few years ago from a particular community, Indigenous community in Australia. And it was just two people sitting talking. And we could just hear their voices in their language. Of course, I didn't know their language. With the images of where they were and water shifting, and it was with two people who live by fishing. And it was amazing how much came through just by being able to listen to the sound of voices without understanding the language, and being able to see what I think they may have been seeing at the time they were having this conversation. It was really, really strong. There was a text translation, but I feel that it didn't give nearly as much as just allowing ourselves to be in there and hearing and seeing with them.
Oh, thanks so much, Armin, for sharing as well. Monica, your hand is raised.
Thank you. Because I'm coming from the human rights world, I am used to having my colleagues share stories about denouncing injustices. And one of the things that has been very challenging is, how do we change our DNA from only denouncing injustices to going further and telling stories that inspire people to build the world that we want to be possible and desirable. And one of the questions that we ask ourselves is, what are the images that we want for other people to pop up in their minds when we're talking about human rights? And I just shared in the chat this group that is always working with graphic designers to illustrate, come up with these new images to illustrate this new kind of a story. So I think it's a very inspiring work.
Thanks so much, Monica. We will add that to the resources on the Google Doc. And I'll just take one last question from Ray. We've been told how listening is so important, but what are good techniques to get your audience to listen? And I'm going to direct that at our listening expert, Jessica, to respond to that one.
Oh, thank you, Beverly. And I would say expert in practice, or not expert, listener in practice is what I would say. That's a really fascinating question. And, if you're speaking to an audience through written word, I feel like it's very hard to, it might be very hard to invite closer listening. But if you have an audience, a real live audience, I think one thing that can really be helpful is just to name that we need to listen, and also model it and practice it together. You might also test the audience, or not test the audience, or play with, I should say, that's the word I want, play with asking the audience a question to really help them engage with the content. So not a perfect answer by any means, but it's a really good question. And I'm curious if others have, I know we're really close on time here, but if others have ideas, I'd love to see Kavya. And then if others have ideas in the chat, please do.
Very quickly, just approaching it with the angle of respect and just saying it, hey, let's respect each other's time and what everyone has to say. And that usually brings everyone together, especially if there's no like one speaker, but everyone is on the same level. Let's respect the next person and listen to them, because we would want to be listened to. So approaching through those tiny words.
Thank you so much, Kavya. Unfortunately, that brings us to the end of our segment today. And Monica has added that they would say connect to their values, start the story with what is of their interest, and bridge the story to the point you want to make. I wouldn't agree more, Monica. Let's continue the conversation on WhatsApp. I want to take the opportunity to really, really thank our co-designers and our speakers, Kavya, Armin, Jessica, Monica. Thank you guys so much for this wonderfully planned and executed session. For the rest of the audiences, if you have any questions or if you want to pick up the conversation, you can be able to follow them on LinkedIn. Their links were included there. You can also follow us on WhatsApp and continue the chat there. There are other events for you to attend to. But otherwise, I wish you all a good day, and I will ask everyone to open their mic and to say goodbye in their native language. In Swahili, it is Kwaheri. I'd love to hear the others as well. Do you have Spanish speakers?
Adios, adios.
Wonderful. French.
Au revoir.
Ciao.
Au revoir.
Bye.
Thank you,
再
everyone.
见，再
Thank
见，
you. Wonderful.
下
Have a
次
lovely.
见。
Thank you, everyone. And we will connect in other sessions as well. Have a lovely time, everyone.